Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jennifer, and I would like to welcome everybody to Exploring Inclusive City Design, a program by Stichting NDSM-Werf, supported by het Nieuw Instituut. I'll be your moderator for today because we are going to dive into the world of architecture, inclusive architecture, locally connected, all of that and beyond. Luckily, I have somebody here with me in the studio that knows all about it, or at least, yeah, I think you know a lot about it. Architect Afaina de Jong. And if there were a lot of people here, I would ask for an applause, but there are not a lot, but there are people here. So an applause, please, for Afaina de Jong. Oh, I like that. It sounds warm, right?
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, Afaina, you are here in the studio, but we'll also have guests in the Zoom. I will introduce them to you all later. But small introduction, because you are an architect, one that is amazing, but also the founder of Afaina, and we might know your work from Rijksmuseum Amsterdam, Centraal Museum Utrecht, but also Venice Architecture Biennale. I've been practicing on the name. And one of the projects you're currently working on is at NDSM-Werf, the place where formerly Sexyland was located. You are the one who is chosen to bring something new, if correct, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so we're gonna dive and talk into all of that. And also our guests who are joining us later in the Zoom, we're gonna talk about how come you know, ask them to be here. What is it that you inspire each other with? Yes and no. But to start with you first, how would you describe your own practice, your doings, what you do?
Yeah, okay, thank you. That's a great question. Well, I started my architecture practice in 2005, so that's almost 17 years ago. It's quite long. And I guess at the time I was very much interested in doing architecture in a different way than I was being taught in school. I was very much interested in kind of counterculture, in communities. I was really interested in how people affect kind of change in the city. And how we could, as architects, could take that information and make that part of our practice. And that was definitely something that was not being taught in the schools. Like it would just be like, look, guys and girls, let's go to the site, take 200 pictures, go home, make a building. It has to look like Le Corbusier. Great. So yeah, I don't know. That's kind of how I started. And I think over the years, I've been doing many, many different things, but I approached it through writing, through theory, through research, through doing kind of interventions in public space, through kind of a more autonomous spatial art practice, you know, kind of venturing out into a little bit the art world to get some more freedom.
And was it because that was what you were missing, or just because that came through naturally?
Well, I mean, I learned through trial and error, right? So I think at the time, after I worked for a short time at OMA, at like AMO, this large international architecture firm, which to me at the time was like, oh, that's so amazing because they do architecture and kind of mix different media, you know. I was like, felt like a freedom, some kind of freedom, some kind of cross-disciplinary thing. But then kind of I felt like I needed more freedom. So then you kind of have to do your own thing to discover, right? And I think over the years, I've been very much trying to incorporate kind of more, feminist theory as a basis of this practice, right? So how do we design for difference? How do you design if you take the margin as the center? I think very basic principles from kind of intersectional feminism. And I think they're really great to reimagine what architecture could be, how we could do things otherwise. And luckily, I think also through economic crisis or through Black Lives Matter, many, many different things, even the architectural practice has to reevaluate where it stands in the 21st century, right? So, yeah. And I think that's also why I invited these amazing 3 speakers, because they also inspire my work through their work.
Yeah, nice. And do you think, since, I mean, you said already it's been a while ago since you graduated from school and started Afarai, do you think that it already has changed within, maybe even in the schools, where they're teaching the kids not to just, look at this, build a building, but to be there, feel, and then create?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think I find it hard to judge. I recently was a guest professor. I had a guest professorship in at the TU Vienna with this amazing collective, Claiming Spaces, a feminist group, and I feel like they really carved out a space to do a design studio, but that was very, and we used kind of we read Audre Lorde, Sister Outsider, and kind of analyzed her text, and kind of out of that the students then formulated a design project. But through reading that, so much came up what is kind of going on in architectural education. And I just felt like things didn't change that much, in the last 20, 25 years. Like it's still, very paternalistic, some even might say violent at times. Yeah.
But is it more exposed and being talked about so that change can no longer be denied and happening, you think?
I think we're definitely, hopefully, standing at a changing point. It's a transition point. So, yeah, in that sense, I'm definitely hopeful. I mean, yeah, and also now I step back into education as the head of the Master Contextual Design at the Design Academy in Eindhoven. Yeah, it's great to kind of be able to shape education in that sense, like who teaches, from what perspective do we teach, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I also like being an outsider, within my own practice, because it allows me a lot of freedom to pursue what I find important.
Absolutely, and that's why you are asked for certain projects, such as one of the reasons why we're here tonight, the project I mentioned earlier at NDSM-Werf, because you were asked to build an inclusive urban space, if I'm saying it correct. But tell us a little bit about what's about to happen there.
Yeah, I mean, even the term inclusive space, I think, is very contested in a way. Like, what is an inclusive space? And I think that's also why we're having this session today. And, I've been working with different podcast makers kind of to explore what that even means. Because I don't know if sometimes, the whole idea of inclusiveness, what does it even mean? Like, it means we kind of have this system and we're going to carve out a little space for people to inhabit or something. But maybe we were thinking about how to make a space not exclusionary, or maybe it's the other way around, or maybe that space can represent a whole world out there that has not been spatially represented. So that's a world that doesn't have to be included, it just needs to be represented spatially or architecturally. Yeah.
Because what is the question that they laid upon you? Like, what if you can elaborate? Like, what is the question they asked? This is what we want here.
Do you want to do something in NDSM? Okay. Well, it's a huge industrial area, right? So yeah, where? Oh, I said, look, the Sexyland is leaving. It's empty. It's a great point. It's like very close to the entry point of where you arrive with the ferry. So the question is like, what should we make there? What should you make? What kind of public space or public building could you create in a space that is heavily changing very fast, that has luxury apartments, where I can't even afford to live there,
gosh.
Oh gosh, no. So what should that space even be, and who is it for, and who gets to say what it should be? And yeah.
So where are you right now with all of these questions?
Well,
And what question are you?
I'm just asking questions.
Okay.
I think we earlier we had an expert session and
About this space also, or about inclusive architecture?
exactly. And we talked about deep listening. Yeah, I'm deeply listening.
To who?
To the people out there in the in North,
Okay.
you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's interesting, and that's why I also find it hard because I'm also digesting what it should be. Like I'm not interested in making like some nice art piece, although I love that. But I'm not an artist, you know. So
In some sort of way.
yeah, definitely. But I would like it to serve the people, and exactly.
Serve the people. So, because the first guest on Zoom I would like to invite in the conversation is Henry Joseph, designer, urbanist, and co-host of Sound Advice. Could you please, if you have a few words to find, why did you say, okay, we need Joseph in this convo?
Yeah. Well, I think Joseph has created this amazing platform, Sound Advice, combining kind of music and architecture. I think it's really compelling. It allows, well, it brings different voices to the table, different ways of doing things. He works for the mayor of London, so he's also someone who commissions actual public buildings within the fabric of London. And I just like his practice, and I think it's super inspiring to me. It's very like, bam. Yes, I'm so happy you said that.
Bam. Well, Joseph, bam, you're here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, I can't. Okay.
Yes.
It's very weird. This hybrid events. This is interesting.
It is. But can you tell us a little bit about Sound Advice? Because Afaina is very much like fan of it, loving it, and you're doing the works. So we would like to know what is the works and how did it come about?
Like all good things, totally by accident. It was never designed. It was something that my friend Pooja Agrawal, who I co-founded the platform with, in the off, we knew that we both like music because we both always had headphones in as we were working. So we knew that there was a music connection there, and we was talking about it. And I think we were talking about how often musicians can define spaces and places and articulate it much better than architects or urbanists ever could, because there's a sort of gut feeling or intuition that they have as well. And then I'm also interested in the idea that maybe musicians, lyricists are better architectural critics than architectural critics are. Because again, they're sort of observing and talking about the spaces and places. What do you do there? How do you behave? What goes on? And observed and articulated in a really clear way. And there's a sort of global. It's a global nature of music. It's easy to transport, or easier to transport than before. People from around the world listen to other genres. They can respect different communities through the starting point of music. But we're also interested in how immaterial culture then links and sits into cities. So what do you need? Like, can you create space without using lots of resources, essentially?
Oh. Fine is like, yes, yeah.
Yeah, because there's so much information in music, you know, and I mean, music has totally informed my practice, you know, and it informed how I thought about the city and about certain neighborhoods or buildings. And music creates a sense of place. It articulates how people feel. So it's like, why are we not even like
including that into
including that? You're like, why are we only reading like architectural theory and not listening to Skepta or Sizzla or I don't know, you know?
Great. And Joseph, with this amazing accident happening and giving the world or the architectural landscape, what do you hope will happen? What are some of the examples that you hope? Oh, I absolutely hope people will pick up this and this is what will come up out of it.
Well, I think that's, again, as part of the Sound Advice project, we sort of, I guess we kind of conceive ourselves originally as like a bit of a media company. So a lot of the architectural media is even more dominated by narrow voices or narrow experiences. And we were quite interested in stepping into that world, but through a different medium and different sort of more concise, shorter descriptions, but then also giving people, us having the ability to commission other people to write for us. And that sort of comes back from mine and Pooja's commissioning background. So we've just published a book in the UK, but there we go, perfect timing on the screen. And in that book, we got 50 essays or contributions from urbanists and designers, predominantly in London, but not exclusively, to write about their experiences and what their speculation of an alternative vision for the future, or an alternative vision for what architectural design could be if it was more pluralistic. And I think that the idea of pluralism and putting our voice in places that it shouldn't be. So again, on the screen, this is a piece we did for the Architecture Review. So again, that's they sort of like, so we're expecting long form letter, a long form. So we then said, well, actually, no, we can write it in 10 sentences and pair each one of those sentences up with a song, and it creates a playlist and it creates a different space. So I think we're kind of like into disruptive practices. So how do you take a brief and how do you disrupt that? How can you do an architecture book with no photos of architectural buildings, where it's all focused on the written word? And then how do you create architecture with no physical elements through music? So we did a party at the V&A, and that was very much, again, about, my observation of London is that communities live side by side, not really together. So where I live, I can walk into my local pub in Bethnal Green, and I am pretty much the only person of color in that pub 9 times out of 10. And this is in the most diverse, quote unquote, diverse parts of London. So yes, there might be people living in the neighborhood, but they're not occupying the same interiors or the same public spaces. They actually can live totally different lives. So for us, it was a challenge. Like, can you deliver a pluralistic event or space inside a historic British institution like the V&A? And the photos that we took that captured the event show that we were able to bring, most of the communities of London and represent them in this place. And the tool we used to do that was music. And I don't think there's any other tool that we could have used to pull that off. So I think, and we're just currently working on more and more moving in towards doing projects, so actually designing things and so moving beyond the critique, I guess, is our next plan.
Dope. And for instance, because you're talking about London, you're here now, NDSM-Werf, but you also travel a lot. Do you also see stuff like, okay, maybe that could work here, or that could totally not work here?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I don't know. I think it depends on what it is. I think, first of all, both in Sound Advice and Blackspace. It's like Sinterklaas.
It's December almost. I get it. I absolutely get it. I've been there too, but fine.
Sorry. Is that that kind of there are different strategies and also different ways of valuing work, different methodologies that I think we share, and some we don't share, but they do. They can be valid also here. At the same time, of course, there's a local specificity. But I think when what I kind of in my conversation with both Joseph and Amina, I think what's interesting is that you also have these kind of echoes, so things that kind of maybe you would see in a space in Lagos can translate to Atlanta, can translate to London, can translate to here, which I find very interesting. That's like this kind of culture that's traveling, but it's also spatial.
Absolutely.
And so I do think there's a lot of overlaps, and sometimes it's where do these how do you design with community, and what position do this community hold, and how do you position yourself as an architect towards the people that you design for? That's very abstract.
Joseph strongly agreeing. Yes. I love. And Joseph, because there was an expert session beforehand, and you had a question. And you came up with a question that was, how can we embed a culture where architects are interested in designing spaces in response to the social and aesthetic concerns of communities? Do you have an answer to that already? Did you get it? Did you find it?
Well, no, not incomplete was like, not a complete answer. But I think a lot of it comes down to what Amina spoke about, which I think is this idea of deep listening, and this idea of humble, the architects being a bit more humble about the scope of agency, and understanding that there's a value to lived experiences, and then, well, not only that, there's a value in letting go of some elements of yourself. I mean, that's the nice thing with Sound Advice, because we've conceived of it as a platform rather than a design studio. When we work with a photographer, we don't tell them what we want the outcome to be. We say, this is the energy that we're trying to capture, but you're the creative, you're the expert here. You do you, basically.
Yeah, you give that freedom.
So we give that freedom, and I think giving people freedom to respond in their best light. I've never been. That's never not worked for us. It's always, like with our graphic designer or whoever we're working with, we always give people freedom, and nearly 9 times out of 10 or 10 times out of 10 for us, people meet us and they deliver way beyond what we're expecting them to do. And I think, and a lot of that comes from mine and Peter's experience working as sort of at strategic level, where you don't have so much detail control. And that ability to let things go is really, really, really important, I think, in how you design a city, because, there's only so much you can control. And if you don't control everything, you have a lot more spare time, which is not bad. And you can use that spare time to read and learn other things. And, but actually the micromanagement of everything is bad for everyone, I believe. So.
Love that. Let people be in their power and give them creative freedom. Do you, Afaina, when you start a collaboration with somebody, or they ask you, do you have to demand creative freedom, or have you already established, like, okay, but this is the terms I work under, or else don't ask me?
Oh, you mean with a client?
Yeah, with a client. That was the word I was looking for.
Oh, yeah, well, good question. Let's say
50-50, what?
Well, I mean, it depends on the project, but yeah, I think you also have to be picky in a way, to do a good project, you also need a good client in a way.
So what does define picky? How do you be picky?
Yeah, I mean, if I have a set of values, things that I find important, so therefore, I don't know, like I wouldn't build, I don't know, I can't work for certain groups.
Okay, yeah.
Or clients, But to get back to something that Joseph once said when we were recording a conversation for my contribution in Venice, and Joseph, you mentioned like the idea of the band, right? Like the architect is not the lead singer, but he's part of the band, and I think that is such a great analogy, that I think once you position yourself as part of the band, maybe I play the triangle. That's also cool, and then what is, and that can shift. Like maybe sometimes your client is on drums, and the lead singer is actually like the people you want to design for. Like if you start to shift these roles, then it becomes really interesting. Yeah,
absolutely. I like that thought. Who are you in the band, Joseph? Who's Sound Advice?
We're the lighting or like sound engineer or something.
Nice.
We depends on the project. I mean, we did a project where we did a fake satirical architecture award ceremony, just because again we wanted to disrupt that. And for that much, very much, Pooja and I were foregrounded, but we've subsequently decided never to be foregrounded in future projects of ours. That there's always someone else who is the center of attention, and again, that's given us more freedom to then think, like, because when you're having to host things or write speeches, that's again quite time consuming. So the time we would spend doing that, we've now can spend either fundraising or doing like sorting out our business plan or whatever it might be. There's all these things that are critical that we need to do to keep this sustained. And I think everyone has a natural space that they want to occupy. And I think for us, it's very much we will be the sound engineer or the person that like pulls the equipment onto the stage, but there are other people who are more talented and better at being foregrounded or being at the center of these projects. So when we did the when we did the shubs at the V&A. And I don't know if the word shubs probably isn't something that's hasn't even reached North London, let alone Amsterdam. But shubs is the shubs.
The shubs.
Shubs. We did a shubs. Shubs is like a house party, basically. It's like a South London house party.
Oh shit!
But we did an event called the Shubs at the V&A, and it was very much again about using a different lexicon. In that they were then forced to use it and put it on all their flyers because it was at their event. And people kept saying to us, "Well, who is Shubs? When's Shubs arriving?" They didn't realize it was a thing, not a person. But as part of that, Pooja and I consider ourselves as we could have DJed if we wanted to, but instead we brought in like an amateur radio station to be the center because they had a totally different energy because of I don't know how to describe it. I think Pooja and I, because we've been in this industry a bit longer, there's a certain expectation that you get to do cool things that you build up. You do a Burke or you do these things, and suddenly you get a little bit taken for granted. But actually, to bring some guys in from London who half of whom had never been to the museum, let alone DJed in front of like 2,000 people. There's a certain energy that comes with that we never could have created. And I think, again, that was us sort of stepping away from the limelight, or stepping away from the center of the project and giving it to someone else.
Love that. Thank you. Speaking of giving it to someone else, I would like to incorporate and shine the light on Amina Hassan. She is a founding member of Blackspace Urbanist Collective, and also associate of WXY. Amina, are you there?
Hi.
Yes, we can hear you. So, how are you?
I am doing well. I'm currently calling in from New Jersey. I'm typically based in the Hudson Valley, about 2 hours north of New York City. And for the past 5 years, I have practiced as an urban planner and strategist at WXY Architecture and Urban Design, where I worked on a range of projects from mobility planning for electric vehicles to facilitating community-based planning initiatives to increase meaningful integration in New York City schools. But as you mentioned, I'm also a founding member of Blackspace Collective.
Yes, can you tell us about that? Because that is very interesting.
Yes,
I was
absolutely.
like, what?
So Blackspace is an interdisciplinary and national collective and platform for Black urbanists. A quick snapshot, our group includes architects, urban planners, artists, strategists, many other professions. We bring a real diverse skill set to the table, but what binds us together as individuals and also as a collective is really our passion for exploring the complexities of the built environment, and importantly, for centering Blackness in conversations of the built environment. So Blackspace, our mission really is to demand a present and a future where Black people, Black spaces, and Black culture matter and thrive. Our vision is to support Black urbanists in that quest, to support physical spaces, to generate new ideas, to push the envelope of how we're taught, how we work. And we do that in a lot of different ways. It's really a flexible collective model, non-hierarchical, intentionally, to allow people to incorporate and engage in the ways that make sense for them, wherever they are in their lives at that time. So, for example, I currently engage in Blackspace as a general collective member. We do have two incredible, fearless co-founding leaders, Emma Osore and Kenyatta McLean. I have to shout out to them. They keep us together. But in this moment in time, I participate as a collective member, working on a working group that organizes an annual conference that centers Black and Brown initiatives throughout the US, working in kind of the built environment.
And how did this come about? What was it that sparked it, or how did it? Also an accident?
Yes, yeah. Actually, it was a happy accident, to echo what Joseph spoke about, kind of asking this question of, is there opportunity to create pluralistic spaces in urban planning and design? The genesis of Blackspace really was through attending the Black in Design conference. The African American Student Association at Harvard University's Graduate School of Design hosted the inaugural Black in Design conference in 2015. It was at a time when the university itself, and I would say the field in general, did not see the value in creating intentionally Black spaces to highlight work of architects and Black architects and designers. The students, pushed forward and fought to host that conference. And it was a weekend-long event that really just celebrated incredible work that's being done across the US and some internationally. And it was through networking and speaking with other people in the audience that we realized that there were a lot of New Yorkers present, and that we wanted to continue the conversation and continue the fellowship and the energy that space afforded us. So from there, we brunched. I typically don't like brunch, but we started meeting really informally, communing over food in one another's homes, rotating from home to home. Brunch led to pitching ideas, working through personal and professional conundrums that came up. That led to really intentionalizing our vision and creating opportunities to expand beyond our home and really engage in urbanist experiences, inviting other people to join in on the conversations that we were having. Without feeling attacked or challenged, like holding loving and open space for exploring new ideas. And that led to creating our first neighborhood strategy in Brownsville, Brooklyn. So that was a year-long process of really co-creating a vision for heritage conservation in a historically Black neighborhood, increasingly threatened by gentrification in Brooklyn. And then from there, we've just kind of spiraled into published content, creating the manifesto.
Because the manifesto I want to talk about, because I read something I absolutely love. I think the first thing I read was create circles, not lines. And I was like, yo, talk to me, and the timing being move at the pace of shoot, you go, because there's a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So the manifesto, I think that one of the things that's really important for the collective and that we kind of have been discussing over the years is that the work that we do is important, but how we work is perhaps even more important. And so we created the manifesto to help guide our growth, to ground our work in values, and to actually be available to the public freely to help influence how other people may work as well. So to give you a sampling of some of the manifesto principles, create circles, not lines. This one really arose out of a desire to have less hierarchy and more dialogue. Inclusion and empowerment is why we work in a collective model with people participating in the ways that make sense for their lives at that moment in time. Some members are board members with regular commitments. Some work in administrative capacities. Some in more visioning and pursuing projects, others in the background in the Slack channels, participating in events. It's really what works for you. Another principle that really resonates with me and kind of to the conversations we've been having today are plan with, design with. So really walk with people as they imagine and realize their own futures. Our role or I see my personal role as a connector, as a convener, as a collaborator, not a representative for any community or communities, not a representative of the Black voice. There is no singular. I see myself as like the lines, notes on the page of music, helping to keep things organized, pushing things forward, but not dictating where it might go. And our collective model allows people to expand the work through an affiliate network. So while Blackspace, the core group, was founded in New York City, we've since expanded to a group of what we call cousins, so family connections in Chicago and Oklahoma and Indianapolis, and that list is growing.
It's growing. Is it also like Afaina? Is it also coming here? Where do you see yourself in this? Are you in this? Are you bringing it over here? Because I mean, there's a reason also why you asked Amina here. You relate, or?
I mean, it's cool. When I met Amina for the first time, I don't know, we were having tea or ice cream, and Amina told me, yeah, you can also start one. We could do a Blackspace Amsterdam or Netherlands. Well, I mean, it hasn't happened yet, but yeah, for me, the manifesto is very inspirational, right? I always show it to my students because in a way, but I also try to incorporate it in my own practice, right? Because, and that's what I like about it, is that it's very clear, you know, what you can do. And I think that's really great that this was created by Blackspace, because it helps us to reevaluate what is important and how to do things. And it also has an ethical and a philosophical foundation, I feel, you know, and I think it's of great value to, city making.
Absolutely.
Yeah, to say, you know, to become a Blackspace affiliate is first and foremost to enact the manifesto principles in your work. And I do that on a day-to-day basis. And it helps to guide and ground my practice, both when I'm working in the collective and outside. So I'm happy to share a few learnings that
Please do.
kind of arose out of being in a unique position of being both a Blackspace representative and also an urban planner at an architecture and design firm in New York. So in May of last year, I was approached by both my workplace and Blackspace Collective to respond to the police killings of George Floyd. And you may remember it sparked national protests and a national reckoning about race and policing and rights to public space. Washington, D.C.'s mayor, along with a group of activists, responded quickly by installing a Black Lives Matter mural in confrontation to the White House with the most expedient materials that they had at hand, which was Department of Transportation yellow paint. And in New York, we felt an urgency to respond as well. And then kind of one of the principles that really helped to guide the response in New York was move at the speed of trust. And that principle says to grow trust and move together with fluidity at whatever speed is necessary. And this is a principle that I come back to all the time. We were faced with an urgency and an enthusiasm for a public response. And a date was selected within a 10-day period. We were asked to respond by June 19th. And so that left us about 10 days time to try to coordinate the permits, the location, the artists, the paint, the painters. It was really an enormous undertaking. and there was a lot of pressure and enthusiasm to get it done by that date. Blackspace came to the table with a commitment to process and a unique focus on anti-racist ways of working. WXY came to the table with a unique access to resources, to industry relationships, to permitting relationships, the ability to really make it happen in the city in a short amount of time. But Blackspace made a really important decision, get confronted with that kind of structure and the timeline, and they decided that since they had competing at a competing event that they were preparing for on Juneteenth, that they had to step back from the opportunity and the project. That move at the speed of trust was a principle that guided and grounded their work, and that within the timeline that was presented, they didn't have that space. And it was an important lesson that it's okay to say no to an opportunity that's not in alignment. And I think you kind of echoed that earlier, that if a project, despite what opportunities it may afford you as an individual, if it's not in alignment with the values or the timeline that you have,
the ability to say no.
You can say no.
This is not the time now.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Move of the speed of trust. That was it indeed. I love that.
Yeah, it's very nice because it really articulates maybe some of the things that you're already doing, or like I feel like I recognize a lot in the points of the manifesto, but to see it as a coherent philosophy to work is amazing.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Amina, because I also want to have another guest, a local speaker who has joined us. That is architect Arna Mačkić. Arna, are you there in the Zoom with us?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm here.
You are co-founder of Studio LA, and you've been joining, you've been listening. How are you in the conversation so far?
Yeah, it's super nice to be here and to talk and listen what you guys do, Amina and Joseph. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here.
Yes, and can you tell us a little bit about your work and how it aligns with what we've heard so far?
Yes, so I'm a part of Studio LA together with Lorien Beijaert. We founded the studio 4 years ago, actually, because, well, I think we all know it's quite a difficult field to work in if you're socially engaged. And before we started Studio LA, we had we had some working experience, but we really wanted to see how we could use architecture as a tool to work on societal issues. So designing things, but also writing, organizing lectures or talks, using different media, designing exhibitions, actually different ways to work on a societal issue. So yeah.
Love. And for you, Afaina, what was it that you said? Yes, indeed. I because we've heard why you said, indeed, Joseph brings this to the table, Amina, and now Arna for you in this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I recognize a lot of the intentions that Arna has, and also Lorien in their studio, right? And I think, it's nice to have like-minded people around you. And I feel like they're searching for similar things, within the architectural practice. What kind of spaces do we need, to come together, to be together, to bring forth change? Can you use architecture as a way that we engage in critical thinking? Arna is also was the head of the architectural department at the Rietveld. So also kind of, and how do you change education, architectural education in a way? So I appreciate Arna a lot. And at the same time, you're also working in Rotterdam South with also an area that is kind of gentrifying really fast, right? So I think also what binds all of us here tonight is kind of working in these urban areas that are gentrifying at enormous speed, you know. How do you deal with that? At the same time, also there's architecture involved. There's a specific styles, architectural styles involved. And yeah, how do you deal with that as a designer? What's your process, etc.?
Because Arna, yeah, what would you like to see different, right? When it comes to how these environments and these cities are built, what would you like to see different?
I think the process of the design process.
Where does
I
it
think
start?
that's something I would like to see differently, because if you look at the system of how, well, in the Netherlands, how you get an architecture assignment for, let's say, in an area that's being gentrified, or a city like Amsterdam or Rotterdam, it works through tenders. So you have to kind of subscribe to it. You have to compete with other architects. And I think one of the most important things I think is necessary to change is the conditions to enter a competition. So you can only enter a competition if you have already designed a specific amount of buildings, or you can only design a school if you have designed 3 schools in the past 5 years. So this means that young architects cannot enter at all. So that's one thing. And then there's a thing that other experts, so people that have like experience by living in a certain place, or cannot enter as well. So they're not part of the process. Then I think there's a thing that there's a lot of within cities, there's a lot of transformation. So like these neighborhoods that are seen as like bad neighborhoods, but then the architects that work on it most of the time don't have any connection to the people living there, or to their values or their wishes, or the way that they have lived in that area before. It's being seen as a blank canvas most of the time. Yeah. So I think this process is really does not work at all. So for example, in the city of Amsterdam, you see that there's a very kind of social ambition, but the conditions for the tenders are not social at all. So if you are socially engaged as an architect and you participate in that way, so your vision is socially engaged, you get 0 points,
Really?
because it's just not part of the point system, you know?
Yeah,
so
it's not valued. It's like,
doesn't make sense at all.
This is major gatekeeping, right? You cannot get in.
Well, I mean, the funny thing, I was recently, nominated for Architect of the Year. And through that, all of a sudden, I got a lot of emails from, developers. Hey, do you want to be part of our tender? And and it's so interesting, because it's really like, even being like, even within that, like, I don't think I could make any difference. Right, I would just be like window dressing, because okay, we also have an architect who's going to do it. Then we have some young architects, because we also need young architects in the tender. And there's you. And it's like, but who am I then? What I'm that picture or something, like, but we want to do like social. And it's like, so you were asking like, who can you work for? I also said that, like, I don't think there's any way that I can. I mean, I'm already against the whole systemic setup of this of this tender. Not even the brief of what we're gonna make, but even how it's done. And I don't see any way to make a change there. Yeah, and Arna is completely right. Like, if you don't change that, that's such a systemic thing.
It's a headache. And how are you going to get rid of that headache, actually, is the question. Because, for instance, right, because we're talking about it and you are aware of it, both of you and all of you joining this program are aware of that, the change needs to be done, right? Then I would like to focus on, because you said so, indeed, sometimes places are being designed where people already live, but we're acting as if they're not there, or they're not being, taken as the expert that will use that space again. How do you, Arna, do this in practice? Do you have examples? Like, how do you indeed, do you talk to the people? What do you use, etc.?
Yeah, so we actually, because we never get into those big projects, we don't do any big projects, but we do have some smaller projects, and we actually always, so a space for conversation, that is actually also a big part of our practice, designing spaces in where conversations can be held. So we have a method by interviewing different people, are the users of the space, and then we have these conversations in the space that we design as well. And we work a lot with young people, so with like high school students or primary schools, actually to also hear the ideas of kids and young people. So yeah, we do a lot of listening. But it's on the outcome is a much smaller scale than designing in a neighborhood in a city, for example. So, and I think it's it's really about a certain culture in the architecture field. There's a certain culture that is created that we are all part of. And what I see is that a lot of architects, also the older ones, are very social people. So they like other people, they're interested, but they cannot step out of this system. And if you do step out of that system, like Afaina does, or like we do, we kind of initiate also our own projects. We find our own funding for it. Then you have another path. But this really has consequences also on how you develop as an architect, because your path is much, much longer, you know? So I would really love to design a building, to learn also how it works. But I know that this is something that will come much later in my career, because I don't follow the system. And how to change it, I think it really starts with education, and there also a culture shift needs to be kind of be done. And I think in the last few years, there's like Afaina is head of the department of social design, contextual design at the Design Academy. There are also a few other new heads, all women. So there are things changing slowly, and I really, I do see that as something very positive. But I think now, like the more the hardcore architectural education institutes, like the TU Delft or the Academy of Architectures, I think there a change still needs to come.
And I would like to, before we close off, I would like to get Amina and Joseph also within the conversation. And then you have like Zoom, bam, oh, see, everybody's there. Because I think, I don't know, I didn't see you nod or so, but I think that we've heard all of you, right? And I think that I hear a lot of, for instance, some things out of the manifest, I hear them coming back, indeed, like the trust and working with the people and engagement. But is there also something you hear that that you think like, okay, I could incorporate this within our city, or it doesn't work here, or it's absolutely the same, but this is what we did to overthrow that? I don't know, let's see if we can inspire each other within 4 minutes. Could be, could not, but I mean,
I'm definitely taking the moving at the speed of trust as a like method to implement, probably more in the role I do at City Hall. And I also thought it was really interesting that the debate around procurement and commissioning is exactly the same in Holland as it is. Actually, in London, I think we've managed to sort of unblock some of those barriers.
How?
Because the mayor wanted them to be unblocked, so people we unblocked them. So it's political leadership in that regard.
Yeah. Okay.
So, for example, so I used to run the commissioning quality part of our team, As part of that, we then removed, so previously you had to have 3 examples of projects, and now we've removed it to 1. And you could also be as an employee in another office. It doesn't have to be within your own sort of liability as a practice. And we removed like the timescale, so that the had to be the last 3 years. It could be any time that's relevant, like in terms of, policy. And then we also removed things like turnover. And basically, when we mapped the architecture sector in London, like 99% of minority, female, or LGBT plus practices were micro enterprises, so had less than 10 staff. And all of the policies that we were using to secure quality, in inverted commas, all disproportionately impacted smaller practices, and therefore made it very obvious we want to and again, back to a conversation I had with Afaina, reframing it as rather than how to make an inclusive thing, but how do we make sure our processes are non-exclusionary, led to a much more radical change. Because inclusion would just be like, we'll get 2 more people in, and are we doing a good job? But it's to say actually we're excluding a certain group of people means you have to make much bigger changes.
Right.
Yeah. I'm really inspired to hear that you've been able to force change, because in the US context, it's very similar, and particularly in New York City, there's a big emphasis on having what are described as minority business enterprises. But oftentimes it's a legal requirement for a certain percentage of an overall budget to be allocated to smaller minority or women-run businesses. And I think that it leads and perpetuates this culture of extraction. And in this case, it's very often kind of a formulaic extraction of identity markers to fulfill a product quota rather than exchange. I think that maybe Afaina, you have experience, and I know that Blackspace and in other contexts you've experienced being at the table, but simply for meeting a quota rather than the ideas and the exchange you may be able to present. So the thing that I would really love to see, both kind of in tendering processes, but also in how we engage in communities, is a shift away from extracting and towards exchange and collaboration.
Yeah, it's a great point. Like for instance, just to have like a nice example, Amsterdam, or actually the Dutch state, is supporting that we're going to build like a national slavery museum. So this is like a 160 million euro building that's going to be on the shores of Amsterdam. And I mean, I'm not going to be able to tender on it, right? Not that I'm saying that I have to do it, but you should imagine that, like recently I was approached by a large Dutch international firm who was like, yeah, that tender is coming up. So maybe we can talk about how you can help. And I think at first I was just so pissed off that I didn't even reply. But then later I thought, let's have that conversation. And it's really like, I asked them, like, why do you feel that you as an office have to design this building? And it was, because we really value diversity and inclusion. And it's just like, that is not a good reason, like even for a larger office, why don't you think in a different way? Like, you can extract from me, but why don't you facilitate the making of that building? Because that office actually has the means, the knowledge to build that museum, because they have done many museums. And then you can support not only me, like it doesn't even have to be me, but lots of different practitioners that are in the field that could make like an amazing contribution. Like it's really you need a different way of thinking that is not so extractive and just like completely. And I think it's kind of inherent to the architecture, but I feel like it's time to change. And even for larger offices, you can't just say diversity inclusion. It has no meaning.
Yeah, you have to do it. You say it, but how do you practice that? How do we see that? Who do you work with? What conversations do you have?
Yeah, but also your position. What position do you take? You can also facilitate something.
Yeah, don't be the lead singer of the band.
Yeah, don't be the lead. You're not the lead. You don't have to be the lead singer all the time, you know. But it's so ingrained in education, in this whole kind of running, like who gets the best commissions, but especially a building like that has such significance, you know, not even nationally but internationally. I get why you want to do it, but maybe it could be way more interesting. You know, if you're really up for diversity and inclusion and bringing other stories to the front, you could support it could be this process like we're talking about. You could bring in so many interesting people who would bring so many amazing ideas to this building.
Thank you. I absolutely, thank you. Thank you for that. Of course, time is not our friend, so we're going to wrap up this conversation. But before I do that, Joseph, the book came but I forgot to ask, where can people get the book? The book that we saw earlier?
If you go to our Instagram, then there's a link in our bio that will take you to it.
So the Instagram of Sound Advice, and then
Sound Advice.
Yeah, get it.
Yeah, get it from there.
Get the book. And Black Spaces, we also go to the Instagram or to the website to be informed of what's happening.
Yes, both on Instagram and the website. You can download the manifesto. You can see our playbook and keep up to date of any future convenings or events.
Thank you. And Arna for Studio LA.
Yes, you can also check out our Instagram or just our website.
Instagram, website, Afaina. Instagram website, all of that good stuff. Please, in the Zoom, please don't hang up, but the people who are joining us in the conversation on a different way, thank you so much for tuning in. If you want to stay updated to all of it, follow everything. For instance, Afaina's project on NDSM-Werf on ndsm.nl. Check it out. Check the socials. Also check the website of Pakhuis de Zwijger for all the programs. If you can later rewatch this and get the information going, see which role you play, which conversation you want to have, and what position you are taking, should not or should be taking. But, you know, let's keep this going. Thank you again for inviting these amazing people and being one of them yourself. So please, a round of applause for this amazing conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you. And let's stay in touch, right?
Thank you. And thanks to all the guests. Like, I'm so happy you came and made time from all around the world. It's never nice to be up here by yourself, but it's great that we have hybrid now.
Yes, so thank you for being the hybrid crew with us today. Have a great one. My name is Jennifer and hope to see you soon. Peace out. Okay, so we're...